Now it is my pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Kirk, a true pioneer in the field of sustainable high-performance computing. Dr. Cameron is a professor and is the Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs at Virginia Tech, where he works as a shaper of the way we think about energy efficiency and sustainability in computing. Dr. Cameron's groundbreaking contribution include the development of the open source PowerPack toolkit, which has become a cornerstone for power and energy benchmarking in the industry. He co-founded the Green 500 list and Spec Power, driving global awareness of energy efficiency supercomputing. His entrepreneurial spirit led to the creation of Miserware, a venture-backed startup that commercialized the world's most popular free energy management software, grano.la, reaching over 500,000 users across more than 160 countries. Recognized with NSF and DOE Career Awards, as well as distinguished scientists from ACM and IEEE Fellow, Dr. Cameron's contributions span from academic to industry spheres. Please join me to welcome Dr. Kirk Cameron as he shares his vision, insight on sustainable computing and its impact on the future of our field. Dr. Cameron, oh, here he is. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you. Oh, I don't want to break things before I use them. Well, hi, and thanks for coming to my talk. It's Thursday. I know you probably have SC fatigue, like I do a little bit. But it's also one of my favorite days because we have the nice event tonight that we'll all get to share time. So if we don't have too many, if we run out of time for questions or run out of questions, I'm happy to talk to you this evening. I'll be at the event. And so I did one of these about, well, it was 12 years ago exactly, actually. And I did such a good job. They waited 12 years to invite me back. So here I am. I'm just kidding. Wow, this is a tough crowd. Pavan didn't worry me up like I hoped he would. All right, so this is not going to be a normal talk because I was asked to talk about sustainability, but then also my work in art and at the intersection of art and HPC and education. And so whatever that is, a normal talk, I'm not going to be doing that. I'll get to the art stuff if you're coming for that, and I hope it's worth the wait. But I'll begin with sustainability and just sort of an overview. I do talk about that a lot because it's what I've done for the last 20, 25 years. And so in exchange for patience on the art side, I promised some Easter eggs in my slides, and most of them will be TV references because I watch a lot of TV, and I'm not going to apologize for that. So sometimes people do in my field. So, but first I want to just thank, some of my students are here. Greg and Hayden and Nitya and Bruno are here. They've been working the booths all week, and I appreciate them. But really, what really makes research fun for me is the people that I work with. So here they are. There's so many of them. I have worked with over 100 undergrads and then dozens and dozens of other students and faculty and whatnot. And I think the common thing they have is that they are okay with my brand of crazy, because I do tend to do different things, and I think that's why I'm here, is because I tend to think a little bit differently than most. It's probably just my background and experience playing through. But so this is kind of a timeline of the stuff I've done, and I'll talk more about it. But the top half or top part is on sustainability, and the bottom part is the art and education piece. So to give you some encouragement, if you're a junior in the field, if you're a student, if you're new faculty or new in the field, I struggled for my first couple of years because I was trying to find something that would, define my career. And I hadn't stumbled upon Power, but I had just graduated, and I had at least one failed attempt at NSF, and so I was talking to people and just like, what do I do? What am I doing? And I read a paper and saw a talk about embedded systems where they had variable speed processors that you could change the voltage, right? It's pretty common in the embedded community at the time, and so it fascinated me and made me think, what happens if that makes its way to HPC? which it did. And the second thing is, I remember going to a CRA-sponsored talk by David Patterson where he basically said, you know, all these things, all these check boxes for a career. So he gave me a roadmap. And one of the key things and key takeaways from that was, how will you change computing? And I really took that to heart. And my whole life in academia has been about, and industry, has been about trying to have impact in a way to change the way we think about computing and the way we compute. The other things I observed around the same time when I was inspired by that paper was that I was convinced that power was going to become disruptive to HPC, despite the field not thinking it would be. They thought hardware manufacturers would solve the problem. Laptops started out selling PCs a few years later. They were on a trajectory to do so. So what that meant was that families of processors that had power-aware capabilities would make their way into servers. That was a prediction that actually came true in about 2008, so about 5-6 years later. And lastly, performance is always critical to HPC. So people have talked about doing low-power systems, but it's never been really something that we can, and GPUs really prove that out even today, is that it has to be high performance first. So my goal was always to increase efficiency while maintaining performance. So, but the three things I had to do to get the work going was basically to prove that efficiency matters to HPC, because people said it didn't. They said, we don't care how efficient we are, we just build them as big as we can. And so the second thing was I had to have a way of measuring power, and that's where PowerPack comes from. And the third was that I had to be able to provably show that we could reduce energy waste without affecting performance negatively. So if you've seen one of my talks over the years, you've probably seen this slide. I created this slide in about 2002. Interestingly, I recreated it last night with ChatGPT. It took about 3 minutes. It took me 3 months to write this slide because there was no data about power. But this slide basically says that we're on an exponential curve for power consumption with HPC. And sadly, I did it again, and I think I show it later in my slides. It's worse now because of GPUs. Sorry, GPUs, I don't mean to throw the cast dispersions. But let's talk about PowerPack for a minute. So these are some of the comments I got when I was starting the work. One was no one in HPC will ever care about efficiency. And the other one was basically that, you know, this sounds okay, but is it really is it too small a scope or too large a scope? They don't know. And so this slide just reminds me, and I think what I did, because I've talked about this a lot, I thought I would try and put things in these slides that I haven't talked about before. So those were the kind of things you're up against when you have a new idea in this field. But so I had a blessing that happened, and that is when I submitted my poster submission in 2004, we had done a number of studies, and we got a poster into supercomputing. And that's the single most impactful thing, I think, of my career, was that opened up windows. Like, we had people attend it, but it was the first power-aware related paper at SC, or poster, I guess. And by SC25, we had 3 or 4 papers. And so then it's obviously now it's sort of expected that we have sessions on power here and efficiency. So a lot of things in that poster: PowerPack, which was before RAPL, power-aware clusters. So we had a laptop cluster you can see there on the side. Application and system level power management we were already doing on laptops, of course. And as I said, so that picture in the middle I use all the time, or it did for many years. It basically shows you where the savings come from. When you're in communication phase, you power down the processor, it's wasting a lot of energy, and then therefore you don't really lose performance. But we had to prove that out, right? So the PowerPack framework was mainly created just to make sure that we could validate our techniques that we wanted to do on the power management side. But it's a big pain in the butt, right? You gotta cut wires, you gotta put resistors in there, you gotta buy expensive equipment. We still do it today because personally, I don't trust the power sensors on board, so I test them. And the other thing is the onboard sensors still don't tell you what's happening across the entire system and how it's broken down by device and component. But you can get a pretty good indication from the sensors that they use now. Also, we invented techniques that I think are used in most of the modeling for memory. So that's in some papers that we did. And we attached to that the application tracing for fine-grained application testing, so you can correlate what's happening on the system and the application to what's happening with the power consumption. This is a PowerPack from a node we just created, actually, that just demonstrates, we were testing it against the RAPL sensors, and we found that the Rappel sensors are underestimating. It's a lot simpler now. We have a lot more cleaner implementations, but it's still useful. And I don't want to, again, disparage the counters too much. You should use them. They're just, you got to realize they're giving you a relative number, not a precise number. And that's okay. The other thing, and this is what I had set out to do, and what I was first inspired to do, was a tool called PowerAware Speedup, a model here. Again, the formulas are just there to impress, but I'm not going to go through them. Basically, what PowerAware Speedup says is that Amdahl's law, when you think about scaling processing elements or scaling computers, basically says, you know, more processors the better to a certain point, and then it levels off. But I couldn't use it, and I tried before I did this work, to describe why and how we were saving energy without affecting performance in our HPC PowerAware work. And what I found out was, when you study this more deeply, is that Amdahl's law ignores overhead. And overhead is exactly where you get all the power savings. If you don't have any overhead, like in LinPack or in, you know, a really dense matrix calculation, you turn that processor down and you're going to lose performance every time. But if you have, you know, synchronous communications, broadcast, stuff like that, during those phases is when the CPU is really just busy spinning. Doesn't matter if it busy spins fast or busy spins slow. It's slow, it consumes a lot less power. So what this model showed was exactly where and how you get, and you can actually estimate how much power gain you can get, or efficiency gain you can get at scale. This one's ISO energy efficiency. This one explains why, or how to get the most performance out of power capping. So power capping says, okay, just turn all the processors, let's say, to a certain speed and power consumption across the entire cluster. What ISO energy efficiency says, and this is actually thanks to Anant Grama from Purdue, who created ISO efficiency, which is a scalability model. This model basically says, okay, let's say you can control all these knobs. Let's pick an efficiency that is maximizing the amount of power you can use and stay at that just under the power limit as long as you can. And you do that by turning all these knobs. The knobs can be power scalable processors, for example, or memory or threads, but it can also be the workload. So you can, in some cases, you can scale the workload in and out. And so that's what ISO energy efficiency gave us. And then I think this is the last model I'll talk about. And then in this one, basically, well, in this challenge, what we had, and this is very recent now, actually, we're still working on this stuff, is like, what happens when you change a bunch of things at the same time? The processor speed, the memory speed, the thread count, what else? GPU power management, all these different devices all at the same time. Well, they're designed to do everything in isolation. The CPU changes its thing, the memory acts in its own way, and not synchronized. And people looked at the synchronization of multiple devices, like 2 devices at a time. And we were the first to look at 3 or 4. And what we found was that when you do 3 or 4, you hit up against other issues. And actually, this is the first time machine learning really became interesting to me. And this is important for people who do data movement as well. So what happens is you have basically 3 types of time in your application when you change multiple things. You have, well, let's say if you have 3 devices. So basically, you have the time that is, this one's a simple version. So you're scaling a CPU, you're scaling the memory, and you're scaling the number of threads. And what you find is that there's part of the time that is only affected by CPU speed, there's part of the time that's only affected by memory speed, and there's part of the time that's affected by both, or more than both, like threads too. It's that interior piece that you see in the middle here that is a non-linear. You can't do it with a linear model. It doesn't work. So all the linear models that we tried to use failed. And so what we found was we needed non-linear models. We needed machine learning. We needed to do training. And what's really happening fundamentally is that you have think about your computation to communication ratio or memory boundedness versus CPU boundedness. Think about those kinds of concepts. And what happens is you're either fully CPU bound, or you're fully memory bound in some cases, or you're somewhere in the middle. And whenever you're in the middle, you got to figure out where in the middle you are. You might be slightly memory bound or slightly CPU bound. And depending on how slightly you are, that determines what you can or can't do without affecting performance when you manage power. So I thought that was a really great insight. And that's where we're struggling with it now, because we want to do the power management at runtime. But when you bring in a machine learning model, you're only good as your training set, and if you need to train in real time, well, now you have all this balance and challenges of balancing the overhead of the model versus the amount of gain you can get. That's where we are in the modeling. So let me talk briefly about my company that I did for 6 or 7 years. People ask, like, how do you start a company? When do you know? What do you do first? I didn't do anything. People approached me. You got some great work here. We think you should commercialize it. And if you commercialize it, we'll buy it. And those people were Merrill Lynch. And they gave me a contract, $55,000 contract, to basically develop the IP within the university, which we did. Meanwhile, the academic meltdown, well, that's probably what I'm having. The economic meltdown, right, happened in 2008. So this is happening, you can see the grant, it's 2007, 2008. So the academic meltdown is happening. I keep saying that, I gotta chalk that one up. Basically, the economic meltdown is happening. But by then, we had venture capital, so we were already on a trajectory to create things, but we moved away. What that caused was we were working in the server space, and we needed to pivot. And we pivoted to the Windows space. And when we did that, we turned out that there were hundreds of thousands of people that needed a tool like what we were doing in HPC, right? The power management without the performance loss. That tool was called grano.la, and it received a lot of awards. It was very popular. It was never a commercial success. I'm going to skip this slide. It was never a commercial success, and we had enterprise-level software that basically collectively, like if you had 1,000 systems, our software would track how much energy savings across all of them, how much on the aggregate, how much you're saving based on how much you pay, et cetera. So we had about 24 customers all over the world, but didn't turn the corner on profitability. So then AMD approached us to buy us, and this is one of those things where just luck isn't on your side sometimes, right? So you see that line in the middle, that's the AMD stock price, right? Or the line is, the graph is the AMD stock price, but that line in the middle was right after we negotiated a deal with AMD. So at that peak on the left, we negotiated a deal, and then it was sitting on the CEO's desk, and the stock dropped, and so that deal fell through. But they were really, really nice. And the CTO gave me an AMD faculty award as a consolation prize. But I still would have rather sold. But maybe I wouldn't be here today because I'd be on an island somewhere. Again, not going to talk very long about these, but basically, you know, co-founded the Green 500. The thing about the Green 500, and they just announced the latest, you know, it's basically. Some people think it's designed to be super accurate or you know, somehow punish people or something. Really, it was just about tracking the efficiency. What the top 500 did really well was you had a data point you could point to for like, you know, 15, 20 years, and it's quite useful to see how we're progressing. You know, or for example, are we progressing comparable to Moore's law or not? You know, and so the same was true for power. We wanted to see, like, if we could influence the industry, but also if we could influence people to think more about power. And so it was all about just tracking. It wasn't about really creating winners or losers. It was just about tracking. So I did everything I could to make the run rules fair so people couldn't game the system. And that was my part, was to basically use our experience. And we had been doing power measurement for 3, 4, 5 years at this point. And so to use those experiences to influence the design. And the design we came up with was the simplest possible. You measure one node and you multiply it by the number of nodes you have, and that's good enough for us. And it's still used today, although they have made some modifications to let people give more accurate numbers. It's still a good indicator of, much like I deride the hardware counters for power, the reality is they're still useful. There were this is like some of the stuff I haven't talked about publicly before, but we had some angry vendors, right? The first time we did it, we had people coming at us and saying like, you know, you're making this company look great and making us look like crap, and you know, why do you hate us? And so, of course, didn't hate them, and we had, I'm a very not smart, but definitely I care about these things. So we had documented everybody we sent an email to. So we had 5 or 6 email people to the company, and they didn't respond, so they didn't participate. But we were good sports, and we let them submit in February the following year. So, and I had a DOE person literally say, "Are you trying to get me fired?" And I was like, "No, that is not my job." So Green 500 still has impact. It's kind of cool. This is just a picture, a snapshot of 24 versus 27. I didn't update it for this year, this November. But obviously, we've made improvements on efficiency. So then there's also spec power, which people here may not know about. So spec power is the equivalent for the spec benchmarks, right? Power measurement, but it's much more accurate. It's much more industry focused. Repeatability, fairness, they come in. They're really important. So I played in a consulting role in that. I was one member of the founding committee of that, but again, our PowerPack experience has informed the decisions that they made for Spec Power. Spec Power basically resulted in a tool called CERT, which is a server energy rating tool, and that was adopted by the Energy Star program. So why is that important? Well, Energy Star, the government agencies are required to buy Energy Star systems and servers, and so at any moment in time, there's somewhere between 150 and 350,000 servers out there that are basically using, or have been rated by Energy Star, and basically at some point were influenced by PowerPack. And this is the last thing in this section, I think. Yeah, is basically that I did have an open access supercomputer for a while, System G. Many of you may have used it. It was quite useful. Basically, we took PowerPack, we scaled it out on a supercomputer that was in the top 500, and we used it for 6 or 7 years. It was extremely helpful to a lot of research groups, so really fun and exciting too. So this is what I mean by you can ask ChatGPT, hey, give me the supercomputer power usage and energy costs over time back to 2002, and it did it in about 30 seconds. So I was pretty impressed, but it took me 3 months when I did it. 20 years ago. So some takeaways here before I go into the next section, which is that basically being first is great, but I think the most useful thing we did was we shared what we did with a lot of people, and because we did that, it grew the community, and there's so much great work that has come out from other people that I didn't talk about that is just heartwarming. And really means a lot to me because I really do believe in sustainability and stuff like that. So, and it's actually across multiple things, right? It's in the research space, it's in the software space, right? So research people are building on what you've done. Software space, they're using your tools. And community, they're using things like Green 500 and Spec Power. The other thing is that today is that despite modest gains, AI is basically eating us up, right? So any gains that we made in the last 15 years or so in efficiency have been just gobbled up by the AI. They were first gobbled up by Bitcoin, but I thought that would just pass, which sort of has subsided a little bit. But now they're being, AI is not going anywhere. So, and then the other interesting question is, like, back to the machine learning stuff we did, is that, can AI help address the problem? That's like a really interesting, cool thing, that AI is the problem and maybe the solution, right? And especially when I said managing power at scale, managing power under extremely increasing complexity is something that's beyond human capacity. It's beyond the linear models that we're used to working in. And lastly, in this set of bullets, the carbon footprint is important, and we tend to think about the demand side, right? How we use the computers after they've been created, and we don't think about how they were created, and we don't think about so much what happens after they're done. And there's some terrible things that have happened lately after things are decommissioned I won't even talk about in this room. But the reality is, like, we got to think that through, right? We source things from the earth, and we put them back in the earth one day, and like, all this stuff has an effect on carbon. So things to think about. And then I thought, reflecting back to those first thoughts that I had when I was a young faculty trying to find an area, is what's the confluence of events today? Well, 2 of the 3, the first one and the third one, don't change, right? Power remains disruptive. I think Pavan said it a few minutes ago, right? It's something we have to think about. It can disrupt what we do. It can keep us from doing what we want to do. So therefore, it's potentially disruptive at any moment in time. And then the third thing is that it's critical to HPC. Performance is critical to HPC. The HPC has not gone away. It's staying there. It's not HC, it's HPC, right? And then the middle one, which was the laptop bullet previously, I think is the more of everything please now, right? So now we just basically say, when you get more energy efficient and you can get more GPUs in there, well, put a couple more in there now, right? Like that's kind of the attitude. I don't want to say it's bad because it's coming from a good place, right? They want to solve problems that we've never been able to solve before, but at the same time, it's not too environmentally thoughtful, if anything. And I should say, I suspect the people will tell us that the manufacturers will solve the problem. So watch out for that. Okay, so the art stuff. Okay, so here we go. Let me make a connection first. And I tried to do this in my abstract, that I do think there's a connection of sustainability. If you think of sustainability more broadly, and that if you think about what's wrong, what happens with energy efficiency and sustainability connection is that it keeps, if we don't do it, if we don't pay attention to it, it will keep us from doing what we want to do. If you think about it really broadly, right? As an educator, I think of students a lot, right? That's what I do. And I worry that people aren't interested in what I do because it's not attractive in any way. Most of the Gen Zs that I meet, my kids included, they want to do something meaningful. And to go up to them and say, here's the server, it's running my code, and it's more efficient, yeah, they don't get very excited, right? They don't get inspired by that. And so the work that I've done in art is not artwork for art's sake, it's for educational sake, it's for inspirational sake. It's to inspire people to want to do what we all have figured out we want to do with our lives. I spent my life in HPC and education. I think I'm committed. So on the left, you see basically astrophysics code, right? And I've always been jealous of these guys. God bless them. They do wonderful things. But what I mean is that the CFD people, they always had the coolest demos. They would just be like, here's a wing going through the atmosphere. Like all these cool things moving and flowing. Always been jealous of that as a HPC systems researcher. Runtime systems aren't really cool and sexy typically. We've tried to do a lot of that in Miserware and make things that are really pretty to consume. I hope you noticed that going through there. But the reality is that it ain't nothing like what an astrophysicist can show you. So I was inspired to do something that would capture people's imagination, inspire them to do work like I do. Maybe not at a scale as an astrophysics, but somewhere. And then the second thing was that I read an article about Raspberry Pis. And I was really inspired by what they did. And what they did was they said, basically, we want to create tinkerers, iPhones and everything, that you don't rip them open and put them back together and see what happens, right? If you do that, your parents will kill you. So the Raspberry Pi was created so that people would have $35, they could go buy one, and then a kid could plug it into a TV, and next thing you know, they're playing with Linux, right? So with a keyboard or something. So really cool, inspiring thing. And I thought, tinkerers, that's who I like to hire in my company, in my labs. I've always liked tinkerers. So how can I do something that both inspires people by its visual stuff and is something that would inspire people to tinker? And that's where the idea for SeeMore came up. So I sent this email, looks like 19 March 2013. You can read it, but it says like, hello, I'm a computer scientist. Do you have a sculptor I can work with? I have a kind of crazy idea. And what was really great was I met this man on the right, Sam Blanchard, and he was like, that's a great idea. We should do it. And I was like, okay, now what? And so I had to find and hobble money together, my own savings from other things, but also inspiring other people to get on board. And we ended up creating SeeMore. Now, what you're going to see in this video is basically where we landed with SeeMore in terms of exhibitions, and we bring them around to museums and stuff, was on MapReduce. So we were trying to connect people from what is happening when you do a Google search, because everybody understands what that is, and connecting that to parallel and distributed systems. And with that, I'll let them cue up the video.
So tell us, what did you learn?
This is a visualization of a parallel search. So what we don't usually see happening is visualized in a sculptural form. It's really great to teach people about what the inner workings are of something like a Google search.
So, could you repeat that, Dad? We couldn't hear that.
Yeah, so she said it's really cool because it's a bunch of computers.
Yeah?
And they're all working together.
Oh, super.
Right?
That's it.
And I was just saying how interesting this sculpture is. It draws you in with the movement, but then you get close and you see these small computers at work, and there's this like wonderful connection, but obviously both between the computers and the work they're doing, but also in us as we occupy these physical spaces. These computers are occupying it as well, in some way kind of showing their work. And that's the thing that, you know, as students we're always told to show our work, but these computers are kind of like doing it in real life in a way that you don't get to see most computers do. And it's beautiful. It's, yeah.
Great. I could not have said it better myself. I'm so glad I had those videos from when we did, that was at the New York International Makers Fair in New York City. Just tremendous. That's the kind of energy you get when you do one of these things. And I also wanted to point out that, you know, those are diverse sets of audiences, from little kids to adults to students. That gentleman was a student at the end, to teachers. Everybody I met felt inspired by it. Even computer scientists. I found some people come up and they want to know what's the stack you're using and what's the OS that you're using, all this stuff. And so just a tremendous energy that you get. And I'm going to boot this up while I talk about my next slide. So let me just give me 1 second here. Ooh, let's get that in there. Okay, there we go. Right, so this slide is just telling you like how much work goes into it. It takes about a day to set SeeMore up. He weighs 2 tons, 256 Raspberry Pis, 256 servo motors. They move in a scissor-like motion. Just super cool, super fun, and also just like I said, exactly what I was going for, which was to inspire people and to get them excited about parallel and distributed computing. This is basically the start of SeeMore 2.0. Whoops. So what you see here is the scissor. It's a modification of the scissor mechanism that we had, so the machines can still move in and out. But now we're adding these LED hats on top of the Raspberry Pi. So, I guess I should just hold it for the video. So this is just running some random patterns, but you know, a lot of what we do is about storytelling, especially at these major exhibits at the Smithsonian and other places. And when we do them, really, you're trying to tell a story. And so the SeeMore that you saw tells a really good story with just motion and a little bit of 3D rendering side by side. But the reality is that, you know, with an LED, we can tell a lot more. So you can imagine we're thinking about ways we're going to use this as an educational device as we build a 30-node system, as we build a 256-node system. And I do have to shout out to NSF for thank you for funding for SeeMore originally. And then the last thing I'll say about SeeMore is that as we build it, there's plans for sponsorship. So if you're at a company and you're like, we'd love to see our logo somewhere associated with this, give me a ring. So, okay. Let me get back to it. So we did SeeMore about 10 years ago, and we used him for about 5 years. Actually, little SeeMore was at the Virginia Tech booth, if you happen to see it. Lacey is more recent. So we built Lacey starting in about 2021, and the first exhibit we did with her was, Lace is obviously named for Ada Lovelace, if you didn't catch that subtlety. Lace is a 30-node tablet system. So you can see in the picture, basically, you know, UT 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, whatever, 10 or 12. There's one, there are 3 in each of those little septagons, I guess, 6-sided plastic or acrylic. There's 6-sided acrylic devices, and so, or I guess casings. And there's 3 tablets in each. And what you see in the middle, you see that little triangle-looking plastic thing? That is basically a 3D printer modified with styluses on it. So when the styluses move, they will touch the screens in succession, okay? I'm going to get to cryptocurrency here in a minute. You're wondering, like, why does it have to do with cryptocurrency? So what we're doing here is we've designed it to play a game. It plays a game. All of the styluses are competing with each other, or the tablets. They're all avatars. They're all named after famous people like Albert Einstein, all the people that are actually in the Smithsonian, because we were doing this at the Smithsonian. So they touch the tablet. Every time they make contact with the tablet, they guess a number. And they're trying to guess a number between 1 and 100. Why? Well, this is demonstrating proof of work to people. So we tell people, like, look, cryptocurrency, what's it about? Well, it's basically this distributed set of algorithms, right? But they rely on work. So there's a race to get to a number. They're trying to solve a little riddle, and there's a race to find the number. And so they just guess numbers randomly, much like you're doing here in the numbers game. Now then what happens is when someone wins, they have to do a consensus. The consensus, they all ask each other, do you trust the guy who just gave you this number? And the answer is normally yes, because they're part of this system. And if they will basically accept it, and when they accept it, it will be committed to a ledger or a blockchain. And that's the second picture here that you'll see embedded in the video. So these are all the avatars, Muhammad Ali, Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong's gonna win, spoiler alert. Albert Einstein, all these folks. So all of those represent those different tablets, the 30 tablets. There should be 30 of them. And at the top, you see the ledger, right? Judy Garland guessed 12, Martin Luther King guessed 12, and so on. And so that's what's happening. That's what we explain to them in real life. And let me run the video for you so you can see what it looks like. So Louis Armstrong did win. Again. Happens every time. So some takeaways, and then we have one more thing to talk about, and then we're going to get to questions. So mechanical devices are really hard to work with. If you've ever done it, I mean, it's not for the lighthearted. Things are going to break. Things won't work. The styluses didn't work. Styluses, turns out, need to be grounded. That's what the human does when they use a stylus. You have to compensate for things like that when you find it. Exhibitions have you desperately as a scientist want to be like, stand up there for 10 minutes for everybody that walks by a museum. Nobody stops. So all of the exhibitions are designed to be 90 seconds or less. And boom, you're done. And then they can talk to the students, they can talk to me afterwards, after one of those things. And then it inspires people from all around, and I think it's one of those unforgettable experiences for somebody, not everybody, but somebody that will never forget it. Last thing I'm going to talk about is the CSGenome. I think, do I have 8 minutes left still? Are I good? Okay, because I want to have time for questions. I'm going to do this one quickly. So the CSGenome is something that we created. I did it. It was inspired by Pandora. So if you don't know the story of Pandora, basically, I think it was MIT. It comes out and they say basically, hey, let's create a vector describing music, like that there's different characteristics it has, and we'll create a vector, and we'll do it for every song in the universe, and then we'll be able to recommend songs to people. Ultimately, is what they ended up using it for. And they went private, and now I don't know what their algorithm is, but it really inspired me, was that I had a problem where I was trying to specify systems of all different types, like across the entire 500, and how do you categorize them? I wanted to create a vector like that. Well, it turns out that that's an extremely manual process and takes a long time to do, and there's a lot of effort involved. But I've been doing it for about 5 years with a bunch of undergrads. It's got a lot of really great things. Let me show you a quick video that shows you how we deal with microprocessors. So that last piece that's on the screen still, that is lineage, right? So, or was on the screen. That's lineage. So that's telling you how different processes are related to each other over time. And that's really critical for this next project that we did last year for Supercomputing 23 with Dorian Arnold, who knew about the CSGenome project and came to me and said, you know, I really want to do something around hidden figures. Like connect the hidden figures of supercomputing to the things that they did. And I was like, well, crap, that's exactly what we're doing. You know, we can connect people to things. So with that as a backup, let me run the second video, and this is my last video. Awesome, thank you. And so that was tremendous success. And what's funny is the takeaways from this one, I'm not going to spend much time here because this is my last slide basically, is that we created a crowdsourcing element to it so that you could come to the booth at Supercomputing and you could enter information. So we were thinking, oh, you know, some processor that we forgot or some supercomputer that we forgot to enter. Guess what people did? How do I enter my name? That's what people asked. And we were like, oh, yeah, you can enter your name. I mean, we hadn't even thought about that as a use case for some reason. I don't know why. I have a fair amount of hubris myself, you know, so I was like, I should have thought of that, you know, or vanity maybe. So anyway, that was a real interesting side effect. And then the last slide I'll show in a second, there's a URL you can use if you want to enter anything. I mean, we'll take any information that you got. It's all going to be vetted, but the reality is that we can do that too. So things like this, all of it, they're non-traditional. You're not going to move the metrics for your tenure case or for maybe your promotion. Maybe you will if you do something extraordinary. But the reality is that they have to be a little bit selfless by their very nature. But I must say that the community has been so welcoming, like this talk itself, to talk about these things because somebody needs to be doing it. Not everybody can do everything, and that's fine. But these things lead to a lot. I mean, in the CSG project alone, that's where I've had the 100 undergraduates come through. And guess what? They're all doing systems, and guess what? 50% are women. 25% are underrepresented groups. And that's because there's literally no ramp. The first task we give them is to scrape a web page. That's the only background they need. They can go as advanced as they want. We have students using advanced AI techniques and analyses on the data right now. So lots of different room for growth there. All right, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for
I made it.
inspiring
I have a few minutes.
presentation. And we don't have the time for questions.
Oh, we don't? Okay.
But I'm sure that Kirk will be here immediately after the end of this session. And so please feel free to approach him and ask questions. I have questions for him. I was really inspired by your talk. I was inspired by both talks today, and I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank Dr. Kirk Cameron and Pavan Balaji for joining us and presenting these visions for our future. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have a safe trip home. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael.